Captain James Cook was a British explorer who visited 6 of the 7 continents in 3 voyages, occurring between 1768 and 1779. He was the first European to encounter the eastern coastline of Australia and almost found Antarctica. In this video we'll travel with Cook from his humble beginnings to his death, and you'll learn some surprising facts about his life and adventures. So let's get started. James Cook was born on the 7th of November 1728 in the village of Marton in Yorkshire. He was the second of 8 children of James Cook, a Scottish farmer labourer from Ednam in Roxburghshire, and his locally born wife Grace Pace from Thornaby-on-Tees. In 1736 his family moved to Airy Home Farm at Great Ayton, where his father's employer paid for him to attend the local school. In 1741, after 5 years' schooling, he began work for his father, who had been promoted to farm manager. In 1745, when he was 16, Cook moved 20 miles to the fishing village of Staithes to be apprenticed as a shop boy to William Sanderson. He was a grocer and haberdasher, a business which sells small articles for sewing, dressmaking and knitting. Speculation is that this is where Cook first felt the lure of the sea while gazing out of the shop window. After 18 months not proving suited for shop work, Cook travelled to the nearby port of Whitby to be introduced to friends of Sanderson's, John and Henry Walker. The Walkers, who were Quakers, were prominent local ship owners in the coal trade, and their house is now the Captain Cook Memorial Museum. Cook was taken on as a merchant navy apprentice in their small fleet of vessels, moving coal along the English coast. His first assignment was aboard the collier Freelove, and he spent several years on this and various other coasters, sailing between the Tyne and London. As part of his apprenticeship, Cook applied himself to the study of algebra, geometry, trigonometry, navigation and astronomy, all skills he would need one day to command his own ship. His 3-year apprenticeship completed, Cook began working on trading ships in the Baltic Sea. After passing his examinations in 1752, he soon progressed throughout the merchant navy ranks, starting with his promotion in that year to mate aboard the collier brig Friendship. Within a month he had been offered command of the vessel. When Britain was rearming for what was to become the 7 Years' War, Cook realised his career would advance more quickly in military service, and so entered the Navy at Wapping on the 17th of June 1755. On the 21st of December 1762 at St Margaret's Church in Barking, Cook married Elizabeth Batts, and they went on to have 6 children. Cook's first posting was with HMS Eagle. For the first year aboard he served as an able seaman and master's mate under Captain Joseph Hamar. After that it would be Captain Hugh Palliser. In October and November of 1755 he took part in Eagle's capture of one French warship and the sinking of another, following which he was promoted to boatswain. His first temporary command was in March 1756 when he was briefly master of Cruiser, a small cutter attached to Eagle while on patrol. In June 1757 Cook formally passed his master's examinations at Trinity House in Deptford, qualifying him to navigate and handle a ship of the King's Fleet. He had continually shown throughout his service a talent for surveying and cartography, which would prove very useful in the years ahead. Cook's surveying ability was also put to use in mapping the jagged coast of Newfoundland in the 1760s. This was aboard HMS Grenville. At this time, Cook employed local pilots to point out the rocks and hidden dangers along the south and west coast. And during the 1765 season, 4 pilots were engaged at a daily pay of 4 shillings each. While in Newfoundland, Cook conducted astronomical observations, in particular of the eclipse of the Sun on the 5th of August 1766. By obtaining an accurate estimate of the time of the start and finish of the eclipse and comparing these with the timings at a known position in England, it was possible to calculate the longitude of the observation site in Newfoundland. This result was communicated to the Royal Society in 1767. On the 25th of May 1768, the Admiralty commissioned Cook to command a scientific voyage to the Pacific Ocean. The purpose of the voyage was to observe and record the 1769 transit of Venus across the Sun, which when combined with observations from other places would help to determine the distance of the Earth from the Sun. Cook, who was now aged 39, was promoted to lieutenant to grant him sufficient status to take the command,
and for its part the Royal Society agreed that Cook would receive 100 guinea gratuity in addition to his naval pay.
The expedition sailed aboard HMS Endeavour, departing England on the 26th of August 1768. Cook and his crew rounded Cape Horn and continued westward across the Pacific, arriving at Tahiti on the 13th of April 1769, where the observations of the transit were made. Once the observations were completed, Cook opened the sealed orders, which were additional instructions from the Admiralty for the second part of his voyage. They were to search the South Pacific in an attempt to discover the existence of the southern continent of Terra Australis. Cook then sailed to New Zealand, taking with him Tupia, an exceptionally accomplished Tahitian aristocrat and priest, who helped guide him through the Polynesian islands and map the complete coastline, making only some minor errors. He then headed west, reaching the southeastern coast of Australia on the 19th of April 1770, and in doing so, the expedition became the first recorded Europeans to have encountered its eastern coastline. On the 23rd of April, he made his first recorded direct observation of indigenous Australians at Brush Island near Bowley Point, noting in his journal,
"We are so near the shore as to distinguish several people upon the sea beach. They appeared to be of a very dark or black colour, but whether this was the real colour of their skins, or the clothes they might have on, I know not."
On the 29th of April, Cook and crew made their first landfall on the mainland of the continent at a place now known as Colonel Peninsula. Cook originally named the area Stingray Bay, but later he crossed this out and named it Botany Bay, after the unique specimens retrieved by the botanists Joseph Banks and Daniel Solander. After his departure from Botany Bay, he continued northwards. On the 11th of June, a mishap occurred when Endeavour ran aground on a shoal at the Great Barrier Reef. The ship was nursed into a river mouth on the 18th of June 1770.
The ship was badly damaged and his journey was delayed by about 7 weeks while repairs were carried out on the beach. The voyage then continued, and at about midday on the 22nd of August 1770, they reached the northernmost tip of the coast, and without leaving the ship, Cook named it York Cape. Leaving the east coast, Cook turned west and nursed his battered ship through the dangerously shallow waters of Torres Strait. Searching for a vantage point, Cook saw a steep hill on a nearby island, from the top of which he hoped to see a passage into the Indian Seas. Cook named the island Possession Island, where he claimed the entire coastline that he had just explored as British territory. He returned to England via Batavia, modern Jakarta in Indonesia, where many of his crew succumbed to malaria, and then the Cape of Good Hope, arriving at the island of St Helena on the 30th of April 1771. His ship finally returned to England on the 12th of July.
Cook's journals were published upon his return, and he became something of a hero among the scientific community. But among the general public, the aristocratic botanist Joseph Banks was a greater hero.
Banks even attempted to take command of Cook's second voyage, but removed himself from the party before it began. Instead, Johann Reinhold Forster and his son Georg Forster were taken on as scientists for the trip.
Shortly after his return from the first voyage, Cook was promoted in August 1771 to the rank of commander. In 1772, he was commissioned to lead another scientific expedition on behalf of the Royal Society, this time to search for the hypothetical Terra Australis.
On his first voyage, Cook had demonstrated by circumnavigating New Zealand that it was not attached to a larger landmass to the south. Although he charted almost the entire eastern coastline of Australia, showing it to be continental in size, the Terra Australis was believed to lie further south. Despite this evidence to the contrary, Alexander Dalrymple and others of the Royal Society still believed that a massive southern continent should exist.
Cook commanded HMS Resolution on this voyage, while Tobias Furneaux commanded its companion ship, HMS Adventure. Cook's expedition circumnavigated the globe at an extreme southern latitude, becoming one of the first to cross the Antarctic Circle on the 17th of January 1773. In the Antarctic fog, Resolution and Adventure became separated, and Furneaux made his way to New Zealand, where he lost some of his men during an encounter with local Maoris, and eventually sailed back to Britain, while Cook continued to explore the Antarctic.
Cook almost encountered the mainland of Antarctica, but turned towards Tahiti to resupply his ship. He then resumed his southward course in a second fruitless attempt to find the supposed continent. On this leg of the voyage, he brought a young Tahitian named Omai, who proved to be somewhat less knowledgeable about the Pacific than Tupia had been on the first voyage. Before returning to England, Cook made a final sweep across the South Atlantic from Cape Horn and surveyed, mapped and took possession for Britain of South Georgia, which had been explored by the English merchant Anthony de la Roche in 1675. Upon his return home, his reports put to rest the popular myth of Terra Australis. Cook was now promoted to the rank of post captain and given an honorary retirement from the Royal Navy, with a posting as an officer of the Greenwich Hospital. He reluctantly accepted, insisting that he be allowed to quit the post if an opportunity for active duty should arise.
On his last voyage, Cook again commanded HMS Resolution, while Captain Charles Clark commanded HMS Discovery. The voyage was apparently planned to return the Pacific islander Omai to Tahiti, or so the public was led to believe. Yet the trip's principal goal was to locate a northwest passage around the American continent.
After dropping Omai at Tahiti, Cook travelled north and in 1778 became the first European to begin formal contact with the Hawaiian Islands. After his initial landfall in January 1778 at Waimea Harbour, Cook named the archipelago the Sandwich Islands after the 4th Earl of Sandwich, the acting First Lord of the Admiralty. From the Sandwich Islands, Cook sailed north and then northeast to explore the west coast of North America, north of the Spanish settlements in Alta, California. He sighted the Oregon coast, naming Cape Foulweather after the bad weather which forced his ships to about 43 degrees north before they could begin their exploration of the coastline. He unknowingly sailed past the Strait of Juan de Fuca and soon then after entered Vancouver Island. He anchored near the First Nations village of Yuquot. Cook's two ships remained in Nootka Sound from the 29th of March to the 26th of April 1778, in what Cook called Ship Cove, now Resolution Cove, at the south end of Bligh Island.
Relations between Cook's crew and the people of Yuquot were cordial but sometimes strained. In trading, the people demanded much more valuable items than the usual trinkets that had been acceptable in Hawaii. Metal objects were much desired, but the lead, pewter and tin traded at first soon fell into disrepute.
The most valuable items which the British received in trade were sea otter pelts. During the stay, the Yuquot hosts essentially controlled the trade with the British vessels, and it was the natives that usually visited the British ships at Resolution Cove. After leaving Nootka Sound in search of the Northwest Passage, Cook explored and mapped the coast all the way to the Bering Strait. In a single visit, Cook charted the majority of the North American northwest coastline on world maps for the first time and identified what came to be known as Cook Inlet in Alaska.
By the second week of August 1778, Cook was through the Bering Strait. He headed northeast up the coast of Alaska until he was blocked by sea ice. Cook then sailed west to the Siberian coast, and by early September 1778 he was back in the Bering Sea to begin the trip to the Hawaiian Islands. He became increasingly frustrated on this voyage and perhaps began to suffer from a stomach ailment. It has been speculated that this led to irrational behaviour towards his crew, such as forcing them to eat walrus meat, which they had declared inedible.
Cook returned to Hawaii in 1779, and after sailing around the archipelago for some 8 weeks, he made landfall at Kealikekua Bay on Hawaii Island, the largest island in the Hawaiian archipelago. Cook's arrival coincided with the Makahiki, an Hawaiian harvest festival of worship for the Polynesian god Lono.
After a month's stay, Cook attempted to resume his exploration of the Northern Pacific. But shortly after leaving Hawaii Island, however, Resolution's foremast broke, so the ships returned to Kealikekua Bay for repairs. Tensions rose and a number of quarrels broke out between the Europeans and the Hawaiians. An unknown group of Hawaiians took one of Cook's small boats. The evening when the cutter was taken, the people had become insolent, even with threats to fire upon them. It was then that Cook attempted to kidnap and ransom the King of Hawaii.
The following day, on 14th of February 1779, Cook marched through the village to retrieve the king. Cook took him by his own hand and led him willingly away. One of the king's favourite wives and two chiefs approached the group as they were heading to the boats. They pleaded with the king not to go, and an old kahuna, or priest, was chanting rapidly while holding out a coconut, attempting to distract Cook and his men as a large crowd began to form at the shore. At this point, the king began to understand that Cook was indeed his enemy. As Cook first turned his back to help launch the boats, he was first struck on the head with a club by a chief and then stabbed by one of the king's attendants. He collapsed and fell with his face into the surf. The Hawaiians carried his body away towards the back of the town, still visible to the ship through their spyglass. 4 Marines, Corporal James Thomas, Private Theophilus Hinks, Private Thomas Fatchett and Private John Allen were also killed, and 2 others were wounded in the confrontation.
The esteem which the islanders nevertheless held for Cook caused them to retain his body. Following their practice of the time, they prepared his body with funerary rituals usually reserved for the chiefs and highest elders of the society. The body was disemboweled and baked to facilitate removal of the flesh, and the bones were carefully cleaned for preservation as religious icons, in a fashion somewhat reminiscent of the treatment of European saints in the Middle Ages. Some of Cook's remains, although preserved, were eventually returned to his crew for a formal burial at sea.
Clark assumed leadership of the expedition and made a final attempt to pass through the Bering Strait, but he died of tuberculosis on the 22nd of August 1779, and John Gore, a veteran of Cook's first voyage, took command of Resolution and of the expedition. James King replaced Gore in command of Discovery, and the expedition returned home, reaching England in October 1780. After their arrival in England, King completed Cook's account of the voyage.
From humble beginnings to becoming a national hero, Captain James Cook is one of history's best-known explorers. His pioneering journeys across the Pacific in the 18th century changed the course of science, and his legacy today is far-reaching. Towns across the world have taken his name. NASA named their spacecraft after his ships. He expanded the British Empire and forged links between nations. Cook had set new standards of thoroughness in discovery. He was unequalled in seamanship, navigation, cartography, and even for the care and understanding of his men while at sea. He acquainted himself with indigenous peoples, both friendly and hostile, yet his appetite for exploration and science would never wane. Captain James Cook had peacefully changed the map of the world more than any other single man in history. I hope you enjoyed the story, but wait, to learn more you really need to check out this video and then this one up here, and benefit today by subscribing. Oh, and I'll see you again soon here on the History Roadshow.